to Tech Explorer. Today I am going to explain the NumPy Axis in detail. So in this video, we are going to see what a NumPy Axis is, how the axes work, and how we use them with the NumPy functions. So let's begin. I hope we all are aware of the early maths when we first learned about the graphs. So let's go back a little to the Cartesian coordinates. These NumPy axes are very much similar to the axes in a Cartesian coordinate system. I know you probably remember this, but just to make it a bit clear, let's take a look at the simple Cartesian coordinate system. Points are defined by the values along the axis in a simple 2D Cartesian coordinate system, with the values of the x-axis and y-axis. So just like Cartesian systems, the NumPy arrays, they also have axes. In a 2D NumPy array, the axes are the directions along the rows and the columns. Array axes in NumPy are numbered. Their numbering starts with 0. This is just like the index values for Python sequences like list and tuples. So let's say NumPy axis 0. The axis 0 is the direction along the rows. It's the first axis in the NumPy array and it runs vertically down the rows. It's applied to a 2D array or a multidimensional array. Now let's see the NumPy axis 1. The axis 1 is the direction along the columns. It is the second axis in the NumPy array and it runs horizontally along the column. It's also applied to a 2D array or a multidimensional array, as you can see in this figure. So in a nutshell, the axes in the NumPy arrays, they are numbered starting from 0, just like the index values for Python sequences like lists and tuples. The values in the sequence, they have an index associated with them. So the first axis, that is the axis 0, is axis along the rows, and the second axis, that is the axis 1, is the axis across the columns. Now that I have explained how the NumPy axes work in general, let's look at some specific examples of how the NumPy axes are used. Now these examples are important because they will help you to develop your intuition about how these NumPy axes work when they're used with different NumPy functions. So let's start with the sum function. So the sum function adds up the elements of a NumPy array. It's also possible to add the elements of the NumPy array along the rows or across the columns. So let's see the syntax of the sum function. So first of all, you have to import the NumPy package as np. Then you can use the NumPy anywhere in the code by using the alternative name np. So np.sum has different parameters. So the first parameter, that is a, it specifies the input array. The axis parameter, it gives you the axis or specifies the axis upon which the sum is to be performed. The dtype parameter specifies the data type of the output. The out parameter specifies an alternate array where to put the result. KeepTimes parameter enables you to keep the dimension of the output same as the input, and initial parameter enables you to set an initial value for the sum. So among these parameters, the a parameter, it is the required one, whereas other parameters, they are optional. So when we are trying to understand axis in NumPy sum, you need to know what the axis parameter is actually controlling. In NumPy.sum, the axis parameter controls which axis will be aggregated. Or if I put it in a different way, the axis parameter will control which axis will be collapsed. So let's see, what does the sum function do? It aggregates the elements either along the rows or across the columns. So I will explain what I mean by aggregate with a simple example. Imagine you have a set of 6 numbers. So if you sum those 6 numbers, the result will be a single number. Very obvious. So summation effectively aggregates your data. It collapses a large number of values into a single value. So similarly, when you use NumPy.sum on a 2D array with axis parameter, It will collapse your 2D array into a 1D array. It will collapse the data and reduce the number of dimensions. But which axis gets collapsed? So when you use NumPy Sum Function with axis parameter, the axis you specify in the axis parameter, that gets collapsed. So let's take a look at that. Here we are going to use the NumPy Sum Function with axis equal to 0. So first of all, we import NumPy as NP. Then we are going to create a simple NumPy array with arange function, and then we will reshape it to create a multidimensional array with 2 rows and 3 columns. So when you print this array, you will get a simple NumPy array, a 2D array that contains the value from 0 to 5 in a 2x3 format. Now let's use the sum function with axis equal to 0. So when we set axis equal to 0, the function actually sums down the columns. The result is a new NumPy array that contains the sum of each column. So you may ask, why? Doesn't axis 0 refer to the rows? It's a bit confusing. I'll explain this. The axis parameter explains which axis gets collapsed. So when we set axis equal to 0, the NumPy.sum function, it collapses the rows and then calculates the sum. So when we set axis equal to 0, we are not actually summing across the rows. We are aggregating the data in such a manner that collapses the rows. So we are collapsing the 0th axis. So in the earlier example, we saw the sum function is aggregating the elements of each single columns and then collapsing the rows into a single row. There were 2 rows, it collapsed into a single row. Now let's use the NumPy sum function on our array with axis equal to 1. So we are going to use the sum function and we will set the axis parameter to axis equal to 1. So before that, we import NumPy as NP. Then we create a simple NumPy 2D array by using the arange function and then reshaping it just like earlier example and then printing out the contents of the array. Now we are using the sum function with axis set equal to 1. The axis parameter sets the axis that gets collapsed during the summation process. Recall from what I have told you earlier. Axis 1 refers to the horizontal direction across the columns. That means np.sum with axis equal to 1, it will collapse the columns and then calculate the sum. The summing is done across the columns. It collapses axis 1. So here the NumPy.sum function will aggregate the elements of each row and then it will collapse the 3 columns into a single column. Now let's take a look at a different example. Here we are going to work with the axis parameter with np.concatenate function. The axis parameter defines the axis along which we are going to stack the arrays. So if this is not making sense, then let's work through some examples. It will probably make more clear once you run the code and see the output. So let's see the NumPy's concatenate function. The concatenate function joins or combines together the NumPy arrays. It is unlike the traditional database join. It's more like stacking the NumPy arrays. This function can operate both horizontally or vertically. So let's see the syntax of the concatenate function. The concatenate function takes different parameters. The first one is the array 1 and the array 2. This specifies the arrays which we want to concatenate. And the next one is the axis parameter. It specifies along which to concatenate the 2 arrays. So first of all, let's take a look at how to use the NumPy's concatenate function with axis equal to 0. So when we use the concatenation function, the axis with parameter, it defines the axis along which we stack the arrays. So when we are setting the axis equal to 0, we are telling the concatenate function to stack the 2 arrays along the rows. We are specifying that we want to concatenate the arrays along the axis 0. Setting axis equal to 0 will concatenate along the row axis. So first of all, here we import NumPy as NP. We create two arrays and then print out the contents. And then use the concatenate function with axis equal to 0. So this is going to stack the two arrays along the rows. Now let's take a look at an example of using the NumPy's concatenate function with axis equal to 1. We are going to use the concatenate function to combine these arrays together horizontally. So let's quickly see what's going on here. So first we have imported the NumPy package as NP, we have created two arrays, and then finally we have used the concatenate function with axis equal to 1. So these arrays, they are two-dimensional arrays, so they have two axes, axis 0 and axis 1. Axis 1 is the axis that runs horizontally across the columns of the NumPy arrays. When we use the NumPy concatenation function with axis equal to 1, we are telling the concatenate function to combine these arrays together along the axis 1, as axis 1 is the axis that runs horizontally along the columns. So this was all about the NumPy axis and how they are used with the NumPy function. If you have any query, do let me know through the commenting below. So if you like this video, do like and subscribe for further tutorials. Till then, stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.